The My Ford University Podcast, Episode 15. We're going to be talking about first principles. Stop copying and start thinking. Hello, colleagues. Welcome to another episode of My Ford University Podcast, where we cut through the fluff and give you the tools that you actually can use to move the needle. We believe not just in learning, but in earning through application. Okay. Today we're going to dive into a powerful way of thinking that separates innovators from imitators. It's called first principles thinking. It's how Elon Musk disrupted rockets and cars. Whether you love him or hate him, the guy demonstrates first principles thinking and does it successfully. It's also how Aristotle broke down logic, and it's how you can get better answers to your biggest questions. Whether you're solving a business problem or designing a new product or, say, just trying to make smarter personal decisions, this episode is for you. So let's dive in. First of all, what is first principles thinking? First principles thinking is the practice of boiling down things to their most fundamental truths and then reasoning up from there. Really as simple as it sounds, folks. It means saying, forget how this is usually done and ask, what's actually true here? Think about that for a second. It's how you stop accepting the way things have always been and start creating the way it should be. Wow, I've had this conversation before. I've had people sit there and tell me, well, this is the way it's always been, and people are really comfortable with it. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Things change. Time to make some new decisions. Time for you to change. Are we going to stay in the past, or are we going to work in future? And by the way, the future is now and coming at us even more rapidly than it did in the past. So my view is you have to forget, again, what is usually the case and start thinking about what is the case or what the case should be. Okay? Here's how Elon Musk described it. It's important to reason from first principles rather than from analogy. You boil things down to their most fundamental truths and then reason up from there. I'm going to tell you a secret here, everybody. Most people don't do this. They copy what others are doing. They tweak what already exists. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Not always. So, first principles thinking is how you get into deeper and smarter situations and build something original. Think about that. Everyone talks about disruptors. Everyone talks about, oh, we're going to change the industry. Sometimes changing the industry is just going back to the first foundational principles and rewriting the code, so to speak. All right. So let's talk about why first principles thinking works and why most people skip it. Well, we kind of know why that is. Most people skip it because it requires a little bit of thinking, and thinking is something that, is becoming more and more in short supply. These are things, by the way, you should have learned in college, and probably, again, in your MBA program or your PhD program. But you don't need to go and waste all that time and money to get it, because we're going to share it with you right here. So why does it work? Let me tell you the truth. Most people don't think, they imitate. They reason by analogy. This is how the other guy did it, so I'm just going to follow that. Well, that's a great approach if you're willing to be second best, because usually the guy that does it first has dominance for a long time in the marketplace, for example. But then all along, everyone gets used to dealing with the big monolith of a company who's doing something. I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, let's talk IBM, and then a guy named Steve Jobs who came along and kind of disrupted things and showed people that it could be done a little bit differently. So, if we want to do things that are going to stand out, we need to avoid imitation, and we need to start working on coming up with original approaches. And first principle thinking does that. If we're just going to follow along, again, it feels like it's efficient, it feels safe, it feels fast, but you're going to be an also-ran. So here's the problem when you do that. When you copy someone else, you're going to inherit their mistakes, you're going to accept their limitations, and you're going to lock yourself into their assumptions. There's that word I hate again. We don't want to assume, we want to suspect, investigate, and then conclude. But getting back to it, first principles thinking avoids all of that. And first principles thinking works because of the following. It exposes bad assumptions. Okay? It simplifies problems. What's the old expression? How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. So you got to break it down, right? It also helps you create solutions that others think are impossible solutions. And one of the expressions you hear from time to time, especially in this line of thinking, if it doesn't violate the laws of physics, then it's possible. And finally, it also works because it leads to surprising clarity. If you break it down to the lowest common denominators and figure out from the get-go and build the foundation, you get clarity. It is hard work. Yes, it is. I'm not going to deny that. But anything worthwhile is not easy. The expression, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. But first principles thinking, while it's hard to do, it's a simple process, does require some work, making it thereby hard. It is also the place where breakthroughs are going to happen. So realign your thinking and consider using first principles thinking. You'll get a better result. So who should use it is a good question. You're probably asking that by now. You don't have to be an inventor or a rocket scientist to start using this. You should be using first principles thinking if you're a business owner who's trying to grow, if you're an employee who's trying to solve complex problems. I'm a project manager. I solve problems all the time. I also do process improvements. Another person who might find this valuable is someone who's trying to build a product. Or if you're trying to make a big life decision, like going to college or not going to college. I would rethink that real hard these days, folks. All right. And finally, if you're tired of copying the same tired, old advice, if you want to do something new, you take a little bit of a risk, and the reward is going to be there because you're going to do something that's going to be a breakthrough. So this is the kind of tool that they teach in MBA programs, and they should have taught you in college, and they reinforce it on a PhD level, and it drives original critical thinking. We've talked about critical thinking before. In fact, at Myford University, we talk about a lot of thinking models and approaches. So here's the good news when it comes to first principles thinking. You don't need a degree to use it. And I would postulate that everything that we do here, you do not need a degree, even though you're going to be told that you do, but you don't. You don't need permission to do this. And quite frankly, they try to keep it mystified and try to dazzle you with how complicated it is. And quite frankly, all of these knowledges and all of these skills are quite simple. And I've said in the past, a motivated 12-year-old could learn how to do this stuff. You don't need that degree, but you do need curiosity. And another thing that you could use that would help with this is some discipline. So, when should you use it? You don't need to use it for everything, but it's very powerful in certain circumstances. What circumstances? Well, something just isn't working. Might use some root cause analysis and sprinkle it into this and use first principles thinking to get it to work. Everything that you're doing is the same thing, or everyone is doing the same thing, right? So you don't want to be like the herd if you really want rewards and you want to stand out, you got to do something a little bit different. And sometimes that means thinking outside the box a little bit. You might want to use it if you've plateaued. You might want to reevaluate, see what it was that you did to get here, and break it down and see what things you can change to get you there. You might also use it if you're creating something new. Again, breakthroughs can give very big rewards. Not necessarily easy, but with first principles thinking, you can identify something different and get there. And finally, if you want to innovate instead of just imitating, first principles thinking is the tool you want to use. And this is especially true if the stakes are high. I mean, first principles thinking, you want to use that when you want to make sure you're building on solid ground and not on assumptions. You don't want to build on sand. You want to build on, a solid foundation with bedrock. And when you do this, again, you're building something that is going to be long lasting. You're not doing the latest fad, the latest trend. You're breaking the mold. Okay? You're disrupting. And it's a simple tool to use to get there. All right. The most important part I always like to talk about, how do you use this thing? How do you do first principles thinking? Well, once again, we'll give you a quick step-by-step guide. Let me give you a breakdown on how I use it. First, step one, I identify the problem. And I've said this before, be intellectually honest. Be sure you know what the problem is. Don't just look at the symptoms, look at the root cause. Be very, very specific. We can't offer same-day delivery service. It's too expensive. Really? Well, one of the first questions that comes to mind is one of my favorite questions. Why is that? All right. Step two, you want to list all of the assumptions. Assumptions, very bad word in my book. Here's some assumptions you might have. Well, only Amazon can do it. Oh, customers won't pay for that. It's logistically impossible. Well, depends on what we're talking about. Logistically, is a very flexible, fluid situation. Step number three, I tend to break things down. What's the same-day delivery really made of? It's made of vehicles, local hubs, software, drivers. I mean, these are some of the things that it comes down to. So then what you need to do is take it the next step, which is step four. Ask what's actually true. Again, intellectual honesty here. Do we need to offer it everywhere? What if you did it in select locations in a beta test and then rolled it out? Can we do it in just a key zip code with volume? Now you're working with facts, not fiction. And when you start doing it in a beta test environment, for example, you can figure out where some of the bottlenecks, where some of the problems are, and then you can adjust. I've talked about systems thinking and design thinking. All right. The next thing I do, step five, is I will rebuild it from scratch. Look, sometimes you can tweak it and get the adjustment that you're looking for, and sometimes you just have to start over. You have to scrap the whole thing and build it again. So one of the things you might want to say is, if I had no legacy systems and I started this today, how would I do it? Again, you don't want to reinvent the wheel, but sometimes the wheel's not quite as round as we'd like, right? So this is how first principles thinking leads to leaner, smarter, and more effective solutions. Again, sometimes you can't be too wed to one particular way of doing something. Sometimes you have to either do something to fix it, or in this particular case, using first principles thinking, you need to scrap it and start over, because you might have gone down the wrong path before, but with first principles thinking, we can start anew and come up with something that it could be breathtaking and groundbreaking. Okay? All right. Give you a personal example of how I use it. I keep hinting at this. I talk about this all the time. I've trained myself not to use the word assume. Again, the old Odd Couple, Felix and Oscar, when Felix was in court and he was trying to convince someone about the problem with assumptions, and he said, it's when you assume, you make an ass of you and me. So What I do instead is I say, I suspect this is true. And then I investigate. I've mentioned this before, my NASIC model. I came up with it. No assumptions. Suspect, investigate, and then conclude. So I will say, I suspect this is true. I will then do investigation. And then I come back with, I have concluded based on this logic and the best information I have at hand at the moment, because I can't wait forever. I do have to make imperfect decisions sometimes. I will use that approach. That is what keeps me grounded. It forces me to ask why something is the way it is. Just because it's been done that way doesn't mean it's the right way. Doesn't mean there isn't a better way. And again, as I've said before, I have said to people, there are times that things have changed, times have changed, technology's changed. Maybe it's time to make a new decision and do it a different way. So this is something that you have to have in your mindset when you approach this. So when I hear myself or someone else saying, well, that's just how it's done, that's a red flag. And I always ask, what's the actual first principle here? What would I do if I were starting from zero? That's saved me countless times in business and in life. I was once asked to process improve a unit. And I said, look, we can work with them and get them to change, or we could bring someone in here and do it on site at a lower cost, or we could outsource it to Mumbai or Manila. I said, but personally, we've already got this structure in place. If we could get them to do some change management, we would be able to get the results we want and improve what's already there. Personally, they never really wanted to go forward with it, and my recommendation after that was to scrap it and start over. And sometimes you have to make that hard decision and do that. Okay, so let's talk about some more examples. We mentioned Elon Musk. Again, whether you love him or hate him, he uses first principles, and there's something to be learned from him. Again, be objective, keep an open mind. Let's talk Tesla. So in America, electric vehicles have been looked at as they used to be slow and ugly. The assumption was that people don't want EVs. I would argue in some cases there's a large portion of the population that doesn't, but there are some that do. But here's what Elon Musk did. He asked, what is the car made of? And can we make it faster, cleaner, smarter? He broke it down into components. There's a battery, there's a motor, there's software, and then he rebuilt it from there. Break it down to its core components and see what you can do to rebuild. I've heard stories where he taught himself rocket science, and he found that rocket fuel was very expensive. And then he decided to look into it, and he found out that he could create a situation where he manufactured his own, and it would cost him a fraction of what purchasing that rocket fuel would be. Again, another example of first principles thinking. All right, let's do another example. Fitness. Most people think they don't have time to work out. But if you break it down, you actually do. What's the first principle of fitness? Movement, consistency, and recovery. That means you can get real results from a 15-minute workout if it's consistent and effective. You've just destroyed that assumption, and the progress begins. Personal story. I try to do 10,000 steps a day. My most effective way of doing it is getting up early and getting about 5,000 to 6,000 before I even go into work. Then when I'm at work, I try to get anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 so that by the time I come home, I either have it done or I can go simply out again and get it. There are times in project management where I am working on a construction-oriented project and I'll come home with 14,000 steps, but that doesn't happen every single day. But my approach was I would just break it into pieces. Remember, before I said what I believe is the best way to eat the elephant is one bite at a time. So I like to get some walking in before work, at work, and after work, and it works for me. All right. As always, I want to talk about some of the pitfalls. Let me give you a few quick warnings on this. Don't get stuck analyzing. We've talked about analysis paralysis. Don't fall victim to it. First principles help you build, not just think. Okay? Number 2, don't do it alone forever. Bring others into your reasoning. Make sure that you're not blind to your own biases. Okay, I've said this many times. Some of my best ideas come from hearing 2 other people give their ideas, and I create a third idea using those 2. There is something to be said of working in collaborative groups. Nobody has a franchise on all the good ideas, and sometimes some of the best ideas come from pieces of other people's ideas and just putting them into a new combination. So don't do it alone all the time. Number 3, don't confuse it with being a contrarian. I've talked about nonconformity. In fact, I have an article on myforduniversity.com that talks about there are times it's good to be a nonconformist and look at things from a different perspective. But it doesn't mean that you're purely a contrarian. First principles thinking is about being edgy. Isn't about being edgy, but it's really about being clear and breaking things down to the lowest common denominator. And sometimes, again, you can be a disruptor without being a pure contrarian. All right, give you a quick little assignment. Try this today, okay? Here's your challenge. Pick a tough problem, business, personal, anything, whatever you want to work with. Write it down and then sit down and think about what you think is true about it. Okay? That's step 2. Then step 3, ask yourself, what do I know for sure? Okay? Not opinions, not assumptions. What are the basic facts? Again, we're breaking it down. Number 4, break it into the raw materials. What's the basic components to this? Then build it back better. Once you try this, you'll start seeing problems in a new light. I know people ask people to do things from time to time. This one's worth doing. Pick something. Pick a couple things and just walk through the steps and see what happens. All right. So we've kind of covered what first principles are, who can use them, when to use them, how to use them. So what I would recommend to you is give it a shot. And remember, most people are busy repeating what other people have already done. It pays sometimes to be a little bit different. It's fine doing that until it's not. The people who succeed long term, they go deeper, they ask better questions, and they think in first principles, as well as other thinking methods we've talked about. Because when you understand the foundations of something, you don't have to copy. You can build something even better. And that's how to build like a leader, a real problem solver. Use first principles thinking, and you're going to stand out and get ahead of probably 99% of the people out there because they're too busy keeping it simple and not innovating and doing what everyone else does. Sometimes the best move is to make a change and do something slightly outside the norm. I want to thank everyone for joining me on this episode of the My Ford University podcast. There's a full article and other related articles on myforduniversity.com/blog. You'll find the full write-ups on these things. Highly recommend you check it out. And if you see the world a little differently, I'm glad to hear it. I'd like that you would share this with somebody. Again, don't keep us a secret. And until next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and do not accept assumptions at face value. Check out myforduniversity.com where you can learn it fast and apply it faster. Thank you, and we'll see you the next time.